We all have these emotional attachment to things. And I had a really good friend who had passed away. I had a few of her things, like a handbag. Well, I never used the handbag. And in fact, it sat in my closet most of the time. And I really struggled with whether I should keep this or not. But I ended up talking to Christian for quite some time about my friend and sharing stories. And that really helped me because it's like, she's not a bag. I could take a picture of the bag. The funny thing is, since then, I've talked about that bag more and thought about my friend more than I ever did before.
When you actually had physical possession of the bag and, could use it.
So it was very much a healing process. It becomes very addictive, downsizing. Like, it feels so good. It's like with each large pile of things you get rid of, I physically feel lighter, and it's easier to put things away and to clean, and like this is exciting. And so, gosh, a couple of months in, I was getting stuff right and left, no big deal. And by the time we were ready to move into the tiny house, I mostly had all the things that I needed on a daily basis, or things that I really loved, like the clothes that I liked the most, and the knickknacks, even, because I like my knickknacks, that I liked the most. So then being able to put them in a space where they each had a place to live, and it was specific, everything has a place, everything is just kind of set up just right. Before walking to my old house felt overwhelming. Walking into the space, it felt good. It felt like me. I love it so much. It's I love walking into my space and making me smile all the time. There's not many things better than that.
This is episode 11 of the Ownstream podcast, featuring Alexis Stevens and Christian Parsons of Tiny House Expedition.
All right. Welcome to the Ownstream podcast. I'm Stephen Shelley.
And I'm Teresa Scoba.
And this week we are really, really happy to bring to you Alexis and Christian of Tiny House Expedition. And in many cases, not in many cases, but in some cases, our guests are people we may not have ever met in person, but we have actually met Alexis and Christian about 1.5 years ago. And wherever you live, there's probably a tiny house community. You should look on Meetup. We're part of the San Diego tiny house community, which is a really vibrant, wonderful little group. Anyway, they had Alexis and Christian were rolling through Southern California, and they had a little meet and greet out in Escondido in a beautiful campground. So we drove out and we saw their house and met them and really, really enjoyed it, and have kept following them since. And they were really, really gracious enough to be on this episode.
Yeah, we talk about it on the podcast a bit, but we were kind of meandering around the RV park, and then we saw this really excited group of folks pouring out of this beautiful dwelling. And tiny houses, if you're not familiar with them, are just typically just beautifully done, to the detail about, who you are and what you want in a dwelling. You kind of design it just to your absolute perfect specs, and they also are just a feat in design usually. And this one is. It's beautiful, as you can tell if you go on Alexis and Christian's website, which is Tiny House Expedition. That's their company.
Right. And kind of like Andrew and Gabriella Morrison in, I think they were episode 4, Alexis and Christian have emerged as not only advocates of the tiny lifestyle, living it, experiencing it, but they've also become leaders within that community, kind of out there at the edge, attempting to both influence lawmakers in order to help make going tiny easier. There are some regulations and rules that these Christian and Alexis and a number of other people are attempting to have rewritten in order to make going tiny more possible for people around the country. But also, Alexis and Christian are the type of tiny house dwellers who travel. So unlike Gabriella and Andrew Morrison, who they have land in Oregon where their tiny house sits permanently, Alexis and Christian are on the move. And what they do is they travel around the country really seeking to connect with and engage with local tiny house communities, helping those communities, provide them visibility, content and support their various endeavors. So they're really they're both very skilled filmmakers, photographers, and so visually their website's very beautiful, and they're essentially capturing or archiving, if you will, the tiny house movement as it is by going from place to place, connecting with local communities, and chronicling what's happening across the country.
And they really, they talk on the podcast about both, kind of in detail about what their home includes, how they designed it, what they included. And they also talk a lot about their experiences on the road, and beautifully about community and what the tiny house movement is doing for community and for their own relationship. So it's very deeply personal, their podcast, as well as, they really share some beautiful stories for how their lives have been enriched personally and in their travels by meeting other folks who are living tiny.
But before we go into the interview, tiny houses are of great interest to us in general as a broader movement. And I think it really boils down to just really kind of math, whereas I think a lot of people eventually end up looking at their, monthly budget and they see how much they pay for their mortgage or their rent, and they wonder, is there another way? And tiny houses have emerged as a viable option for many people. Many people with kids, with families, are living in tiny houses, adjusting their lives and their lifestyles to create more time and more freedom and more abundance in their lives. So it's very exciting, something that you should definitely check out if those things are of interest to you. So we'll be back afterwards to wrap up. Until then, enjoy this great interview with Alexis and Christian of Tiny House Expedition. Well, let's get rolling. It's great to connect with the both of you guys again. I guess our introduction to the two of you, more official introduction to you, was through the tiny house community out here in San Diego. In other words, I think we knew of you before that, but you guys were coming through this area. Where was it? Escondido? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were parked out at a gorgeous little camping area. And it was one of these things, and maybe listeners might relate to this, but when you're going into a campground to find a tiny house, there's like RV, 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 and then suddenly there's, wow, look at that.
Gorgeous.
Amazing looking little
intricate little dwelling.
Oh, man, that's the place to be. So we drove out to meet you guys, and you were so friendly, and your house is beautiful. And so anyway, we actually have met you, although you've met many people like us, so many adoring fans. But I guess by way of starting, it would be interesting to hear a little bit about your lives before the move into the tiny house, and kind of talk about sort of how your life was structured, where you lived, and what you were up to before you made this change.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us on, guys. And you're absolutely right. Tiny houses definitely stand out in RV parks. Well, before we kicked off our tiny house journey, I was living in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I was working at a marketing agency. So it was like a 9-to-5 type job, and owned a house, 100 square foot house, so not a big house. And Christian and I were actually long distance for a while. He was back and forth from North Carolina and New York.
Right.
Yeah, so I was living in an apartment in Brooklyn, but before we decided to actually go forth with this project, I was living in a 1,600 square foot apartment in Brooklyn with two friends, just working up there and traveling for work a lot.
And where in Brooklyn were you? Because Teresa and I are from Brooklyn.
We lived in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I was in Bushwick.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
I lived in Bushwick for a while. And actually, I'm originally from North Carolina, so there's some worlds colliding here.
Yeah, I was going to say 1,600 square feet's actually a lot in New York.
Huge in New York City.
It was one of the nicest apartments I'd ever lived in. And had the nicest kitchen, so it was great.
Right.
So, just right before we started the project, I moved out of there and moved in with Alexis right when I guess it was probably 6 months before we started building the house.
No, it was like 3 months before
was
we
it 3
started.
months?
Yeah.
And so what was the impetus for going tiny? Like what was the feeling in your life right then, and the, being long distance, living in the living situations you guys were in, like what happened? What changed?
Yeah, well, I had been divorced not too long, before, maybe a year before we started dating. And coming out of that period in my life, I was looking for big change. I was looking to reduce stress. I felt stressed and disconnected from myself, and was looking for something to give me purpose, and was also looking to build community, to take like a more like direct control of my life. I think I felt lost for a long time. After I fell in love with tiny houses, which actually came from, we took a road trip early in our dating relationship to Michigan, randomly, and we discovered, that we work really well together and we like traveling together. And we talked long and hard about building a teardrop trailer. And Christian introduced, he's like, have you heard about tiny houses on wheels?
Yeah. And then within a week, she had an idea of building one and doing a project where we traveled around the country doing a documentary film.
I think it was more like a month.
No, it felt like a
or
week.
2.
Yeah.
So you went from not even knowing about it to full-fledged epic idea. I completely relate. That's awesome.
That's how I do. It really resonated with me, like, this idea of like simpler living, and there's a lot of ways to achieve that, but also kind of being a ticket to adventure, and not just like the kind of adventures that we have around the country, but like everyday adventure, of being more conscious about how you're living and connecting more with people around you, because that just happens in a tiny house.
It does.
Yeah. And so I was like, this is great. And then I was itching to get back to my filmmaker roots. And so I thought, this is such an amazing story, which is the tiny house community. And what really makes it special is more than the houses. It's the people and the fascinating housing projects that are trying to use tiny houses to meet the needs of the community.
And so, did the build take place in North Carolina? Is that right?
Yeah, it sure did. We had, actually it was Alexis's friend, Tom and Joanna, actually, Alexis approached them about building on their property, just because they were living on a farm at the time. And Tom was like, not only will I do that, but I have all the tools you could need, and I want to help you. Yeah, so it took
dream come true.
Yeah, 9 months of building on the property, and getting help from him and a few other people to actually make it happen. And now Tom and Joanna actually have a company called Perch and Nest, where they actually have built a handful of tiny houses as of now.
Yeah.
And
we made him fall in love with tiny houses.
Yeah. Yeah. So since then, they've been doing really good.
So you moved down, Christian, from Brooklyn, and you guys lived throughout the build, I guess. And I think I read somewhere that you guys did about a large share of the build. Were you skilled in any of these ways? Were you good at carpentry or building at all? Had you ever had any exposure to anything like this? Talk about that and the hands-on nature of the tiny house build that I think many people are actually excited by, something that really is I think, cool to the both of us.
My profession is photography. That's what I went to school for. But my father has worked on every single house I've ever lived in. So through osmosis, I learned how to do lots of things from him. And after just growing up in a house where there was always construction, some kind of construction, whether it was remodeling a bathroom or turned a closet into a bathroom one time, and took a kitchen from one side of the house and put it on the other side of the house. So, he did really extensive stuff, but he'd actually never had any training either. He's one of these people that, and I've kind of taken on this, where he can just, look at a couple of things, maybe look at a little bit of information in a book and be like, all right, I got it. And then just make it happen. Yeah. So, cool. Yeah. So that's kind of how I took on the build. I've never built something that was basically like one project. You know, I've done parts and pieces of things before, but never one big thing. So I knew that I was going to need help with parts and pieces of it, but I knew I could compartmentalize the whole thing and be like, all right, I got to build this wall first, and then I got to put it up, and then I got to build the next wall, and then I got to put that up. And so
Christian's just a really great like problem solver, and he's really good at logistics. But like most importantly in my book is that he knows how to use tools, but if he's unsure, he always takes it slow. He's like very safety conscious, and it was kind of like it's like the less interesting thing, but like it really put my mind at ease when he's like left at the work site for like long hours.
Yeah.
We know other people who've been building tiny houses who've had accidents,
major accidents,
so
taking fingers off. So yeah, it was just slow and steady. If I didn't know how to do it, I went even slower.
You really enjoyed it.
Building a house. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. That's why I want to rearrange the living room.
It was like his full job.
Yeah.
Well, it shows in the house. It's really well done. I mean, we remember being in there. I think we were in the house with, there was about 6-7 other people in there at the time. And yeah, you're kind of moving around a little bit, but there's a nice space in the front, and it's a nice kind of communal sitting space. And you figured out a really cool way to have stairs up into the loft, which I appreciate. I always wonder, when you finished the build, was there like a celebration or anything? It must have felt so satisfying to have built your own house, or at least the majority of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's something really, Christian, first of all, Christian did 75% on his own. You know, we had good friends who were invaluable, but there is something really special about being part of crafting your own space, brainstorming like, you know, storage solutions, and just like putting in a nail, you know, hammering a nail or painting a wall. Just, it's like really satisfying. And I know for you, Christian is like really great at finishing, but like that's where I really saw the extra sparkle in Christian's eye, like when it was like time to come up with like fine tuning the floor plan and the interior space. But like he hardly got to catch his breath, because the first night that he spent in the house without me, we moved our house. We had like a deadline, and the idea was this is going to be a tiny house village exhibit to give people an idea of kind of what that would look like, but then also just to celebrate community. 1,000 people showed up, and it was like 95 degrees or something.
Winston-Salem summers, yeah.
And then it rained and nobody got out of line.
Yeah. I was like, I guess people are into tiny houses.
Well, we definitely want to talk more about that tiny house community. We wanted to ask you, you know, obviously you were both transitioning from different living situations into the tiny house, and you were moving in. Well, I guess you'd been living together already, but can you talk a little bit about like what that transition was like? I mean, obviously you had a lot of excitement around it. You were building your own space designed just for you, but can you talk a little bit about, was there a period of transition into this new way of living and what that was like?
Yeah, there definitely was. There's also a different aspect to what we do, because we're traveling. So,
well, it just adds another level of transition.
It adds another dimension to it. But, you know, just with us moving in the house, it was really a little bit of getting used to the space. By the time we moved into this, we had taken the 900 square foot house we were living in and basically gotten rid of almost everything. You know, we sold the fridge, we sold the stove, we got rid of the dining room table, all of that stuff. So there's basically, it was like a sofa, a TV.
Yeah, so there was an element of moving in a tiny house that was a relief to have all your stuff like
in the right place.
You know, something that's definitely gone by the wayside is there is a certain amount of bumping into each other, or that just happens, or just like you have to sometimes compromise and, you know, kind of like spatially of like, I need to be over there or I have to put away laundry and you're kind of in the space I need to do that. So there's a little bit of that. And like we used to say, excuse me a lot more. I don't think that happens.
No, that doesn't happen. but yeah, there is kind of she's totally right. There is a compromise, especially with doing laundry, because it's like if you're sitting on a sofa or something, I may have to put sheets away, and that's, where you're sitting. So. Right.
And then I think one thing early on, we figured out that the morning routine was where it was a little bit of a sticky situation. But this was easily solved because fortunately I like my sleep more than Christian. So here, because the way the house is set up, when you come downstairs, in the morning, you go to the bathroom and then you go to the closet maybe to get dressed. Well, the closet blocks off the kitchen and the bathroom. So by me staying in bed, like 10 minutes longer, which I'm not complaining about, Christian does his thing, gets out of the way, and then I can get dressed and he can make coffee at the same time. So, I mean, it's like, it seems like not a big deal, but it's just like stuff that you have to learn and get used to in a tiny house. It's kind of like figuring out like your dance, your routine.
And part of that is our one butt kitchen.
It was like 1.5 butts.
Yeah, like 1.5. We're traveling with our house. So we built a smaller tiny house. So it's only 130 square feet.
Well, it's only 17 feet of house.
Right. So, and we built inside the wheel wells, so it's even smaller width-wise than most tiny houses nowadays. So it just took a little bit of time, to get into a routine.
And then perfecting the organization, and like dirty laundry goes in the shower, in the hamper, and like right away, because something you discover quickly moving in tiny houses, it gets dirty quick. Now, you clean it up quickly, but it kind of drives you nuts. And like we have like hard drives and all kinds of just stuff that can get cluttered really quick. So we've just learned for our own sanity, it's like you have to be good about putting stuff away.
Yeah.
And so the size of the house, you mentioned the length of it was 17 feet. What's the width? It's about 8 feet or so, or maybe less than that since it's inside the wheel wells.
Yeah, on the inside of the house, it's actually like 6'5". wide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 17. And so 100. And how many total square feet did you say? 130.
130.
And does that include the loft?
No. Usually what people say is that it's the space that you can stand up in.
Right.
Downstairs. So 130 is the footprint.
Yeah.
But it gets closer to 200 when you count the loft space.
That seems like a lot. I don't know. I guess we need to do that math. But our bed is a queen size bed, which takes up the majority of the loft. There's some cubbies and a little floor space in front of it, and then there's the loft over the front of the house, which is for my little boy, and there's a single bed and table and toy box. And he's our part-time resident, and he's 10 now.
Oh wow.
How does he like it?
He likes it a lot better now.
He does like it better.
Well, and you guys have a full kitchen. I guess, I think some people who hear of tiny houses can't fully grasp how well put together these houses are, and that there is a bathroom, that there is a kitchen, that there are things like laundry facilities. Why don't you talk about what's in the house and how you placed things and designed it from that standpoint? Because we've seen it, and I'm already realizing, gosh, we're sort of asking questions from the lens of having seen the house, and we shouldn't do that because people listening probably haven't seen it.
Yeah, well, like we said, the house is 130 square feet. It's on a 20-foot trailer, but we have 3 feet of deck on the back of the house where our front door is. And it is
front of the house, back of the trailer.
Front of the house, back. It always depends on. Yeah, it always depends on if you're traveling, it's a trailer. If you're living in the house, it's it's the front door. So it's like 17 and change long on the inside and about 6.5 wide on the inside. So it's not built over the wheel wells. And we decided on an L-shaped kitchen because I wanted to be able to, even now, it's like we have a big glass door front door. So even if I'm standing outside that door, I can look through the house and look out the back side of the house. So it makes it feel more open.
So the front part of the house, we have a very sizable couch, long enough for a 6'2" man to take a nap on. Mm-hmm. And, of course, everything's multifunction, so it has a lot of storage. And then one of my favorite things in the house is this awesome shoe rack that Christian came up with that takes about 1 foot wide and
6 feet tall, 7 feet tall. Yeah.
So it holds 20 pairs of shoes in a very small, organized. And this, I downsized a lot. Both of us did.
She did really good, yeah.
But, there's so many occasions for shoes.
True that.
And I always like to point that out, not just because I love it, but also because an important thing for designing your space is for you. So, you can have shoes. You don't have to be a monk. But we have a table that's our folds up. It's our everything table, our dining room and desk. And we made our own version of that IKEA table that's in everyone's tiny house. Mm-hmm. And we have a closet that's quite large, and it's a closet, and on the front part of it, it's a seat and this funky staircase where the second step slides out. It's a cantilevered step. So it allows us to maximize the space and keep the footprint of the stairs really small. And it's also a bookcase. What is that called? Bookcase?
The kitchen's, like I was saying before, we did an L-shaped kitchen. So we did a little, it's I guess it's not a college fridge. It's a little bit bigger than a college fridge. So it's an under the counter refrigerator. When I think full kitchen, I think of it has a place to cook, a place to wash dishes, and a place to keep some food. And that's what we have. We don't have a dishwasher. We don't have a...
You're the dishwasher.
I'm the dishwasher.
We have an oven and a stove, and I like to cook, so that was important to me. It's a 20-inch apartment stove, and we have 2 pantries. One with sliding wire basket drawers, and then one that's actually behind the bathroom door. Which when the bathroom door is closed, then it exposes some shelving in the bathroom wall that Christian, again, brilliant. He was this is not a structural wall and it's kind of wasted space. So why don't we carve it out?
Yeah. Mm. And all this can be explained much easier if you go and watch our video on YouTube. There's a house tour we have on our Tiny House Expedition YouTube channel.
Yeah, we'll totally link to that. Absolutely. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm sure the visuals will really help everyone. You guys have a lot of beautiful film and footage on your website.
Because it's the steps, the closet,
it's hard
the door. It's hard to explain.
Sure.
The last bit, the one thing we decided to do, I wanted to do, was have a shower big enough to, for a 6'2" guy to shower in and basically dry off in. So we actually have it's 36 inches wide. It actually could have been 34. Actually, might have been better, but the 36 is absolutely great. We were totally splitting hairs because when you're building a house like this, it's a matter of 2 inches would have meant that I wouldn't have had to cut the countertop to slide the stove over a little bit. Right, so if I had those 2 inches, I wouldn't have had to do that. We used to have a self-made composting toilet, but when we were in California, we changed over to a Nature's Head, the Nature's Head toilet is pretty rad. We like it a lot.
Oh, but the best thing about the bathroom was another brilliant idea from Christian that we now know that there are other tiny housers out there that saw that and were inspired. But
Salt Lake.
We have a shelf that is latched on the wall, and it folds down and sits on the windowsill.
Over the toilet. And behind the toilet is a full-length mirror and some shelving. And so anyways, this is where I do my makeup every day, and it's perfect. And if we iron clothes, which we don't, you can iron clothes there.
Mm-hmm. So you guys talked about getting rid of a lot of stuff. And obviously you had to do that, probably moving from the spaces you were in to what you were moving into. And you also talk on your website about how moving into your tiny house is really stripping down to the essence of who you are. Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like how it felt to get rid of all that stuff, and then what it's felt like afterward?
Yeah, absolutely. Christian's been downsizing for years. He had a 2,500 square foot house, and I'll let him say a little bit about that. But my personal downsizing, I was a bit of a pack rat, and maybe wasn't very aware of that for a long time. And something that took me a long time to be aware of is how much my things and my clutter was really stressful and kind of was overwhelming me. And so kind of becoming aware of that, and then trying to go through the downsize process was a little painful at first, but I did slowly, like one room at a time, starting with like the easy stuff like trash and things I didn't really care about, but like layer by layer it gets tougher, and one of my favorite stories about downsizing is how, we all have these emotional attachment to things. And I had a really good friend who had passed away, and I had a few of her things and like a handbag. Well, I never used the handbag. And in fact, it sat in my closet most of the time. And I really struggled with whether I should keep this or not. But I ended up talking to Christian for quite some time about my friend and sharing stories. And that really helped me, because it's like, she's not a bag, So I could take a picture of the bag. And the funny thing is, since then, I've talked about that bag more and thought about my friend more than I ever did before.
When you actually had physical possession of the bag and, could use it.
So it was very much a healing process. And then, it becomes very addictive downsizing. Like, it feels so good. It's like with each like large pile of things you get rid of, it's like, I physically feel lighter, and it's easier to put things away and to clean, and like this is exciting. And so, gosh, a couple of months in, I was like getting stuff right and left, no big deal. And by the time we were ready to move into the tiny house, I mostly had all the things that I needed on a daily basis, or things that I really loved, like the clothes that I liked the most, and the knickknacks, even, because I like my knickknacks, that I liked the most. So then being able to put them in a space where they each had a place to live, and it was specific, like, everything has a place, everything, is just kind of set up just right. But then walking into the space, it doesn't, like, before walking to my old house felt overwhelming. Walking into the space, it felt good. It felt like me. I love it so much. It's like, I love walking into my space and like making me smile all the time. And there's not many things better than that.
Christian, tell us your process with that. I'm particularly interested in the whole kind of stripping down, minimizing, getting rid of excess. And Alexis, what you were just describing is really, really poignant to both of us. But I don't want to jump over what I know, Christian, you wanted to say some things about this too.
Yeah, my story was just a little bit different. I was also married at one point and owned a 2,500 square foot house. Only lived in it for a few years, but accumulated enough stuff that it was like a 5-bedroom house. Every room either had office furniture in it, office stuff, or bedroom things in it. Had a whole dining room, had all this stuff. I had a huge backyard with all kinds of gardening tools and all that stuff. But when I got divorced, we sold the house, and I ended up basically either giving away, getting rid of. I actually didn't throw away that much, but ended up having just enough stuff that it fit into one of those. I don't know if you've ever seen those. U-Haul does like a little, it's almost like a little pod. It's like a big box.
Yeah.
It's an 8-foot wide, 10-foot long box. I put all of my stuff in that, everything I owned in that, and in my Honda Element. And that was everything I had. So I went from, a really big house to the 10th of the stuff into that storage unit almost immediately. So since then, it was a lot of paring down different things and seeing what was more useful. So I'd lived in a bunch of different houses that year. I think I moved in 2 years. I moved like 9 times. So actually moved out to Utah, and eventually moved to Brooklyn, and only had just, mostly the necessity stuff, but was still holding on to pots and pans and plates and things that I knew I would, absolutely need. So when we eventually got to the point where Alexis and I were living together and paring our stuff down, I still did the same thing. I went through my storage unit and took out all of the things that really meant something to me. I'm a photographer, and I've been taking pictures since I was actually in elementary school. So I have boxes and boxes of photographs. So I had to do something with those because there was no way I was getting rid of them, because they are important to me. So one thing Alexis and I did, we did get a storage unit, but the funny thing is it's a 5x5 storage unit, and it's probably stacked a little bit lower than waist high with stuff with 11 containers of my photographs and 3 boxes of her Christmas stuff.
Yeah.
I think because we.
Oh, not that much.
All right. No, it's 15 boxes of Christmas stuff. But no. So yeah, we only brought one small container of Christmas stuff with us because we knew we would have a very small tree.
But something I think of is, even though you did all the downsizing, you've always told me that you're happiest when you have your camera and a backpack.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Because I like to travel, and when I've traveled across country before, but I've always been okay with not having a lot of stuff. But so this is like, as far as us traveling, this is like the best of both worlds, because I get to travel to all different places across the United States and meet all kinds of amazing people. But at the same time, I get to sleep in my bed every night.
Yeah.
He's got
Yeah. So that's kind of my story.
How does it feel for you?
How does it feel? It feels the same.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny because I've always been able to just kind of morph my situation. It's like I went from a big house to, when I was living in Utah, I was living with 5 other dudes in a house and working at a ski resort. And then I went to Brooklyn, where I was living with some friends in a big, nice house, apartment. And, so I've just been able to roll with it. So here I even still feel like, I actually told Alexis' sister today, I was like, I've actually got to go through my clothes again, because there's been a handful of stuff I have not worn this winter that I left in the closet because I was like, I'm going to, wear this stuff. So,
so we're still downsizing.
So, so there's a jacket up here I haven't worn once this winter, and I know I'm going to sell it. But at the same time, it's like I also lost my hoodie that I wore all the time. I left it when we were doing a shoot.
He talks about this all the time, okay? Like, he won't let it go.
Yeah, so, it was all it was a green hoodie. That's all it was.
But it was your favorite.
It was what I just wore it all the time. So it's like, I need that back, but there's other stuff I need to get rid of. So.
Well, I'm sure that experience of, starting to strip down to the essence, like getting rid of things you might have thought at one point you needed, and then, feeling on the other side how much freer or more yourself you feel. Like we've had that experience. I think,
totally.
Traveling just with backpacks, or, as we've minimized and, moved from one place to another and got rid of things, like I can imagine a tiny house especially, it just encourages you to like keep shedding, keep stripping it down.
Yeah. Well, it's making it more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and then I think for me, to be honest, even though my shopping habits, my consumption patterns are like so much healthier, and, like if we wanted to go shopping for something, we go looking for the best one thing that we're looking for. But I still feel like we're surrounded by marketing. I don't know, like it's so embedded in us, our consumer culture, that I still feel the urge of like acquiring things. But it really does help to have a container, or at least for me, that helps control. If you put too much in our little tiny house container, it doesn't feel good. So that helps.
You have a natural limit to what you can do. I actually find myself we live in a small condo right now, although that's going to change soon, I think. But that's a whole nother conversation. But I will find myself walking around, stalking through the apartment, just looking for things to throw away because it feels so good to just get rid of clutter, get rid of things.
Yeah, I've been there. There is another aspect to our story. With pulling our tiny house, we actually pull our tiny house with a U-Haul truck. They actually are a sponsor of us by letting us use a U-Haul truck. So
anyway, people get on to us about like as if it matters, like you're cheating, and I'm like, okay, no.
Yeah,
about do you?
Yeah. and the nice thing that for us that the U-Haul allows is that, as opposed to if we were taking the house around with a pickup, we actually have it. We treat it like a shed. So I've got tools in it.
Snowboard.
We got all of our snowboards, our bicycles. We have all of our event material, that we had to even pare down again to go to the Georgia Tiny House Festival.
We used to have lots of sawdust in it for the toilet.
Yes.
Right.
We did. I saved the sawdust from the build, so I had 3 big containers of sawdust.
That's smart.
I was like, I got it. I got the room for it. So, so there's things in the truck that I haven't used, but it's like it's not like I can throw it away. I have a bunch of photo gear in there, and we haven't been back east yet to drop it off at my storage unit. So it's just in the truck, and
some of our leftover materials that we took with us and we've given to people actually.
Oh yeah, I give a water heater to Elvis Summers in LA. So he could use it for a mobile shower that he was building for homeless. There was some wood in there.
A DIY tiny houser in Vegas, a water tank, a holding tank.
A freshwater tank.
It didn't work for our house, but it was great for her. Yeah.
So, and she's using it.
So extra stuff would go in there in that case, because you're going to probably meet somebody who can use it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm still, there's some tools in there I really don't need. So if I come across somebody that needs, a random thing, I'll probably just part with it.
Right. So that's nice. It feels good. People are always delighted to get free things that they need.
Yeah.
It's like a little tiny house consignment shop on wheels. Well, let's talk about your travels, because I think, tiny housers in some cases will, for example, we interviewed Andrew and Gabriella Morrison. Their tiny house stays in one place. You're kind of doing the other, if you will, model, that there really isn't a model. The nice thing about this, Alexis, to your point about people kind of having an opinion about a U-Haul, is that this is really, you're setting something up that really works for you, and you have the freedom to ultimately do exactly that. And that's what's exciting about this. It's not necessarily creating another cookie cutter. That's not the point. I'm excited to hear about your guys' travel and the decision to build that into this operation. And maybe this can also kind of open the door to talk about the great work you're doing, kind of bringing photography and film into this community and becoming kind of, I wouldn't say archivists of it, but certainly being a lens through which many of us can see what's happening in that world.
Thank you. That's a good way to put that. So like I mentioned earlier, when I was doing research originally about the tiny house movement, and I was really inspired by a growing number of housing projects or just different ways people are using tiny houses around the country, and I was really curious about that. And the best way to learn about it is to visit in person. But so all that research really inspired the documentary project, which is why we decided to travel in the first place. So Tiny House Expedition is a documentary and community outreach project. So we travel with our tiny home, and we have a nomadic lifestyle that we do and incorporate visiting friends and family around the country. But the bread and butter of it is to do public education events. We like to do, open houses or participate in round tables, so we hold and participate in community events as a way to share about this tiny living lifestyle and stories from our travels. And the other part of that is we are advocates. We've been heavily involved in advocacy to help promote more legal acceptance of tiny housing. And then so our documentary work is twofold. Originally we set out this idea that we're going to do a feature film, and that quickly changed to a series because there's so much story. And we're traveling across North America, and we're trying to meet as many different kinds of tiny house people as possible, because there's no one size fits all. There's no one kind of tiny house person, even though there's a lot of similarities, and that's interesting, but there's a lot of different kinds of people that are drawn to this. So, this is what we're looking to show, which is like how tiny housing is revolutionizing the American dream and the American housing market. But it wasn't very long into that project that we created this other project, which is Living Tiny Legally, because as we did community events, we heard from people that they don't, they're unsure about the legal issues around it. They're intimidated about approaching their officials, and just generally like a lot of confusion. And so that inspired us this is kind of like our public service, and we're very passionate about it, is we make Living Tiny Legally about the legal obstacles that around tiny housing, but most importantly, how to overcome those, and by showing case studies of cities and national model building codes that are working to address that issue. So anyway, so that's what we do and why we travel. But along with that, and I'll let Christian talk about this, we've met just some tremendous people and inspiring communities like Dominique Moody.
Yeah, Dominique is somebody we met. When did we meet her? In Ojai, California.
Last March, a year ago.
Last March, yeah. And the funny thing is, if you've ever seen some of her videos of her build and her tiny house that she calls the Nomad, it's an amazingly little beautiful, handmade, really thought out structure. And it's funny because I told her this. I was like, I never thought I would actually meet you, because it was just it just seemed like a person that we wouldn't bump into, or that wasn't very specific to some of the things we were doing, but come to find out it was.
Yeah, she's an artist, and that's how she approached her house. She's an older woman. She's African American, and 50s, and she's legally blind, which is incredible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But yet she was big part of building her own home. and I think I come back to her a lot because she's just a remarkable storyteller, and she has a long family history of nomadic people, like going way back. And so she's carrying that forward with her nomadic living, which her house is called the Nomad, and she travels to do different artist residencies around California. But something that was really interesting about visiting her was that, and this opened up, there's so many levels of community and broadening of how you look at it. But when we met her, she was in residency on someone's property in Joshua Tree, and a musician couple, and she was helping them transform their space into like an artist retreat. And they didn't know each other, but had become fast friends and helped each other out quite a bit. And so to really expand this idea, like even in like a backyard parking situation, you can create an intentional kind of community. And then but we visited many actual tiny house communities around the country. One of them was Community First in Austin, Texas, and it's a village of tiny homes on foundation and also RVs. And it's you drive into this property and you're just blown away by how beautifully landscaped it is, and how adorable all the houses are. And so it's for people who are formerly homeless, and they all pay a small rent. But the planning of this community is like so thoughtful. It's like there's so many layers to it. There's, micro enterprise opportunities for residents, and there's social service workers, and there's farm animals that are both like working with them could be both therapeutic and also, functional. But the most special thing, it's hard to say that. One of the most special things is they have all this programming, like a drive-in movie theater that invites the outside community in. So you're breaking down stigma.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. We'll have to link to both of those. We'll link to Dominique into that community you mentioned in the show notes. Those are both very interesting.
How many of these tiny house communities would you say are out there? Like, we don't know much about that at all. It's so interesting to think about how people are also redefining the way that you can live in community.
Yeah, absolutely. Because my definition, like I said, like there's this backyard community. It's like, okay, well then there's a lot more communities out there to consider. But in tiny house, like community developments, there's a handful.
They're all set up very
right.
differently for the most part.
So there's a handful that are tiny house specific.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a handful of tiny house and RV community. And various forms, like it might be a tiny house section, or it might be an RV park slowly converting to a tiny house park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the ones that were in Austin were actually tiny houses on foundation, and that's kind of the same as like the Opportunity Village.
Oh, well, when we talk about tiny houses, we're always thinking of tiny houses on wheels and on foundation.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because they both serve a lot of the same purpose. But what the wheels do is, a few different things. It's your assets travel with you. One way to look at that. But the other thing is it's a housing outside of the housing market.
Right.
And that's what makes that special because, which is funny because it's an alternative to a housing market that doesn't work for a lot of people. But yet, now that the numbers of people living and wanting to live tiny have grown so much that we've reached a point where we really need more legal acceptance to help give more people the option and to be more secure in where we're going to be parking. Because most people don't travel like us. There's a small handful that travel like we do.
Very small handful.
So it's very fascinating that you get something that's like so alternative to the mainstream for good reason, but now it's like, but really to be successful, you need to be incorporated into the mainstream. And so then there's a segment of tiny house people that we've interacted with who are like not about that at all. They're like, we don't want the government telling us what to do. Right. And not to laugh at them, but just laugh because of just chuckles. Like, guess what? Like, that's just the reality that we live in. And, you can live in somewhere in the country and not be bothered. And yes, unless someone complains about you to the community development or planning and zoning people, you're probably fairly secure. But is that enough?
There's a part of the population that kind of likes the renegade, rebellious part of it, maybe not conforming to the legal structures. But as you're saying, like if we really want to invite more people into this movement, finding ways to introduce codes and legislation that make this more a possibility is the way to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we tell people all the time, as much as we're legal advocates, we don't think this should hold you back. But I think you should approach the planning of your build or your purchase with building code and zoning in mind. You should plan for it, but don't let it hold you back. Because that's another thing that's fascinating to me is that the number of people who are living tiny have actually pushed in gray zones, have pushed the conversation forward in legal settings. Right. Like they're, zoning boards, even state level governments like in Colorado have like said, oh, like this is a big thing. People want to live this way. And now we need to figure out how to incorporate it into our planning.
Well, I have one specific question I want to ask before we transition a little bit. But in terms of, you guys travel a lot. You've been on the road for quite some time. If you could highlight maybe one or two places that were just super wow, beautiful maybe, or interesting places where you pulled up in the U-Haul in the tiny house, you lived there for maybe however long you were there, a day or so, whatever it was. But most people live their lives in the same place every single day, and you're out kind of exploring and moving. And I think there must be some interesting locations or two that would be worth highlighting.
Yeah. Oh, that's tough. Oh, so many good ones.
Well, one of the places I know that we always talk about a lot is Ojai, California. And it's mostly because when we pulled up there, we pulled up at the right time of year. It was it was
March of last year.
It was March, and all of the citrus trees were blooming, so the whole entire town smelled like orange blossom.
Oh, wow.
It was like
amazing.
It was stupid. Yeah, it was ridiculous. So
like, this is amazing. It was like intoxicating, and there's a magic to Ojai. It's in a valley, and you're surrounded by gorgeous mountains, and there's a big artist community there, and it felt like a kind of like a fairy tale.
yeah, and it was the right time of year also, because things were green, and because in the summer it gets really hot there, which we went back actually back there in September. Okay, and it was warm, but it wasn't ridiculous. But it's still a town that can only get so big because it's a valley. So the community wants to keep it that way for the most part. But they are looking at tiny houses as an option just to densify their town and get more workforce housing.
Right.
But what's another place?
No, so many. Westcliff, Colorado, where we were parked.
Westcliff, yeah.
We're parked on a little homestead of our friends Ryan and Hannah of Restoring Simple Homestead is what it's called. And they had baby goats, and our backyard was a forest, and the view out our kitchen window was of an Rocky Mountain landscape.
Yeah, it was really, really pretty.
So that was memorable. So when we travel, we love our animal time and our baby time that we get from everybody. So there's like goats, dogs, cats. Gosh, so many like when we slept by the ocean in our tiny house in Ventura. That's also close to Ojai. That was really special.
Yeah, right next to the ocean. There was us and a 3-foot wall, and then the ocean.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So it was really rad.
Go to sleep, sounds of waves.
Yeah.
And and then one of our all-time favorites and our first real real wow story-wise for our documentary was in downtown Las Vegas at La Malopolis, the tiny house and Airstream community owned by Tony Hsieh.
Oh, cool. Yeah, nice. That's the CEO of Zappos.
Yeah. And they have a really great little community. I mean, right in downtown, it's got like the vibe of a lot of Burning Man vibes there. There's a big art. There are
it's like the ideology of Burning Man kind of pushed into this community, and the visuals. Right. So, and there's always as soon as the sun goes down, there's a fire burning until the morning.
Whoa.
So, always. Yeah.
Music is almost always playing. The communal space features a stage made out of funky, twisted metal. And that was really really delightful because he's a billionaire, but everyone else who lived there come from all different kinds of backgrounds, and some of them are artists, some of them are waitresses.
Yeah, and and they're all awesome. They're all nice, and since then we've we've bumped into 2 or 3 of them since we've been traveling.
No, it's not a shocker. We bumped into some of them at Burning Man.
Yeah.
We bumped into some of them in Utah.
And
that's one of our other favorite things is making friends with people in one place and then seeing them in a totally different place.
That's cool.
We've seen our friend Lee is been the most in 4 different states so far.
Yeah.
That's great.
Wow. Well, that really, speaks to us because we think a lot about how your home can encompass nature and just the places around you, and bringing a sense of adventure into our daily life is something we're definitely seeking. Something we wanted to ask you before we start to wrap up. A lot of our podcast is really directed at trying to understand people who have made these types of choices to help empower others who might be, feeling stifled in their daily life, living the mainstream, not really understanding, how they might get out or having the courage to do that. Can you guys talk a little bit about, veering off the traditional path really takes courage? Can you talk about, what beliefs or convictions might have helped to propel you over any fear or resistance you had to going tiny?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I think it does take a lot of courage to do something outside of the traditional scripts that our culture says this is what a successful life looks like, and these are the steps that you should be taking, and that when I reach a certain level of success in my life, I should be living in this kind of house and have this kind of job. And I think you hear that a lot, but it's really ingrained deep in our culture. And then the layer on top of that is we're influenced on a daily basis by marketing. And it's and coming out of marketing, I have an intimate perspective of that. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're influencing people, and we're inundated. I mean, we're all inundated with that so much. And I think then we get another kind of picture of what life should look like and what it should include. I think there has to come a point, I think it's different for everyone, where you realize I am not happy. Okay. And this is not working for me. Coming up through your own personal process of figuring out what might make you happy, and maybe it could be really, really simple of maybe it's just having more downtime and more time with family, or it could be grander than that. But when you get to this point of paradigm shift, the beginning of that is realizing that it's all about you. And I'm a huge community person, but it starts with you. And it's we're both divorced people, my son is happier when I'm happy, and that's important to know. And I have healthier relationships with my friends and family when I'm happy. So you really have to think about it as this is a you-focused thing, and that is not a negative thing. It's not a negative kind of selfishness. It's actually a really healthy kind of way of thinking. But I have to say, a big thing for me was just was owning this vision of the future that I had, and not knowing that it was all going to work out. But every day, I don't know if it's manifesting or what, but I am moving towards my goal. I'm actively moving towards my goal because I am making change happen, and I'm putting that energy out into the universe, or maybe everything's not worked out, and maybe my self-esteem and confidence isn't quite there, but fake it till you make it really works. Or I think so many times when we were doing this project, when that works out, or when we get there, or always thinking the language that we say to ourselves is so powerful. So telling yourself that yes, you can do it, and speaking in the right context, not if or I hope. No, when it happens. And that was huge for me, because this was a big, scary thing that we were doing. Gonna get out of a house that I have to live in, leave a good job that I have, change my custody situation, all very scary stuff. But being able to move forward with just the idea of that I am trying to make a happier, healthier lifestyle for myself, and if all the things that I'm planning out don't work out, just the journey of it, just the path of trying to go for something different, is worthwhile in itself, because you learn so much about yourself along the way. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's as simple as being brave enough to say that my well-being comes first, mm-hmm. and that I am the captain of my own ship. So I hope that made some sense, but that was a little bit about how I took the leap.
That's great. Very inspiring. There's a lot of courage in what you're speaking about. And I imagine, too, that, maybe this is a segue into a quick question about relationships in tiny houses, because you guys hadn't really lived together very long before this began, and at least before the project began. I guess you had lived together for a while before you moved into the house, but moving into a tiny house, I imagine, has it does something to a relationship. And I know many people who live in gigantic houses who have very unsatisfying relationships. So I don't know if the relationship between those is inverted, but most of the people I know live in tiny houses have very good relationships. And talk about kind of what that's like, living tiny, having a relationship, and being in such a cozy space. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. I'm sure that there must be some feelings about that.
Yeah, you say that like it's a bad thing.
Nowhere to run, Christian.
Well, it's the thing is that the people in big houses that have those problems are not communicating, right, because they have the room to not communicate. We don't have that luxury. We it's not really a luxury, but we have to, if there's something going on with either of us, we know it, because we're within, I think the furthest we can get away from each other is 12 feet. So we know what the other person is if the other person is unhappy or happy. So we do realize that conversations need to happen. And so we make those happen. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes, it does still sometimes take a day,
Well, that's unusual.
It is unusual, but usually it's out in the open fairly quickly. And it's about the conflict resolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if that negative air is there, it just makes the whole space feel uncomfortable. Right. So we'll tell anybody, like, we argue frequently, and I think that's a healthy thing. But the biggest thing is that we resolve it. We get it out and resolve it quickly. Mm-hmm. And I know in past relationships, internalizing is something that I did more, and that's incredibly destructive. Mm-hmm. So our communication was okay before we moved in.
Yeah, it was okay.
But I think I think it's grown by leaps and bounds.
Mm-hmm. So it does let you know if it's going to work or not, living in a tiny house. Well, find it out quicker than you expect.
I'm sure. So we have 3 questions that we ask at the end of every podcast that sort of ties them all together. So I know we're nearing our wrap-up time, so we'll jump into those. The first is, what book or books, up to 3, would you recommend that every human being should read?
Oh, God. That's hard. Oh, God. I'm looking at our bookshelf.
That's good.
Yeah.
3 books, I think.
Well, here's one that I'm going to do it another way because I don't read very much. So my books are usually either photography or art books or just interesting books. And one of the books is Roadside America. And it's about all the weird stuff that's out there in the United States. That's like, the world's largest ball of twine.
Right.
It's things like that. So it's actually something I've kept for a really long time, that I've always looked at because I've always known that, traveling was my thing. Mm-hmm. I also have two art books that I love. One's Andy Goldsworthy, and another one's Tom Friedman, and they're both kind of conceptual artists, and one does conceptual art with man-made materials, and then Andy Goldsworthy is actually a guy that does stuff with things found in nature. So you've probably seen his stuff more than likely. It's like a photograph of the bottom of a tree, but it has all these leaves in almost like a hue pattern of green to red. And he also does things with like building big beautiful walls with half cut trees inside them and stuff. But I always look to those for inspiration, just because I'm an artist. So I always look at those a lot, and that's why I keep carrying them around.
Yeah, and gosh, it's like your brain gets so full. I'm gonna name a couple books that have had a big impact in this new chapter of our lives, and one of them is Tent City Urbanism, by Andrew Heben, who's one of my heroes and the founder of Opportunity Village Eugene and Square One Villages.
Cool.
And I think that is a great way to rethink people experiencing homelessness and community. And another one, I'm going to give you books that have had an impact recently, is Little House on a Small Planet. Is an excellent book. And it's an older book, but it has a lot of tiny and alternative structures and a lot of great philosophies around simple homes and energy efficiency, with a little bit, something like the nuts and bolts of what those mean, but also kind of the philosophy around living alternative lifestyles. And it's by Shay Salomon.
Cool.
And then someone that I think that everyone should read in order, this is a plug for our good friend, is The Big Adventures of Tiny House. And
it's a children's book.
It's a children's book, and it was inspired by our reclaimed, salvaged tiny house and our tiny house adventures across the United States.
Cool. Wow, we're going to get that one right away for our daughter, I
think. Awesome.
So second question, this is particularly poignant for those living tiny, I think, but what item or keepsake have you held on to the longest and why?
Okay, well, I don't know if it's the longest, but it's for quite some time.
Sure.
Some of them go back since my kid was a baby. I have a tin collection, and I laugh because it seems like a weird thing to have in a tiny house, but I don't know. I've had a thing for tins. I have an Art Nouveau tin, and I love Art Nouveau, and I have some just beautifully crafted tins from Germany that always had a special attachment. But I took them from being semi-useless to being super functional, and one of the tins is a trunk drawer, and one of the tins holds our silverware, and it's something that it's something simple, but it makes me smile. I love my tins, and I've been able to incorporate them into our tiny home by giving them a purpose.
Cool. That's great.
What about you?
Yeah, I have no idea.
I was thinking it might be that book you just mentioned, Roadside America.
Yeah, those books have been with me for a very long time, and they're still in the house. Yeah, I don't know. There was a weird thing that just happened recently that is something I've had for a long time, of that keychain thing. So I have the set of keys, my keys for the house whenever I've had a house or an apartment or whatever. I've always had this keychain on my key ring, and it's this leather, it's just a leather, piece with a button on it, kind of, that was like a piece of I don't know, it's supposed to look like ivory. It's probably not, but and it had an etching of a wolf in it. Well, a friend of mine gave me that on the day I graduated high school, and it has been on my keychain ever since. So just like, I guess it was like a week ago, I heard something hit the ground. I looked down, and it was actually that little leather piece that had actually come off of my keychain, and it just made me think of that. Oh, my friend gave me this in 1994.
Wow.
Whoa,
cool.
you're
I've had it, on my person since then. I've had it on me since then. So
That's kinda nice.
yeah, it was just a memory.
That's a long time. Yeah.
Wow. So the last question is, what have you learned in the last 30 days that you think every person should know?
Oh, I have a good one. This is this is actually something I think I am always relearning it, which is not to judge a book by its cover. And when we were at the Georgia Tiny House Festival this past weekend, we had a great conversation with a gentleman named Mad Dog. That's his nickname.
That wasn't his. That was his. Yeah,
Anyways,
everybody calls him that. He introduced himself as
that's
Mad
what
Dog.
he goes by. Okay. and he is a Southern born and bred guy who, and he would say this too, probably, you look at him, you might think, redneck guy, you have a certain idea of what he might, maybe certain ideas of what he might think or be about. And he was on the staff of the event staff there. And he helped build, he didn't want any credit for this, but he helped build a tiny house that was given to a veteran. And we had a 45-minute conversation with him, I think, where he explained his perspective on the tiny house movement and why he thought it was important, and his kind of like life philosophy. And it was like really like incredibly like poignant and moving, and just like the way he said things or the way he worded things, like, if you're not really listening and you just like heard his like style of speech, like you might not give it a whole lot of thought. But like I think we've gotten better at listening as this has gone along, maybe from doing all the interviews, but like really listening to him, I was like, he was saying some really deep stuff. And I could go into detail, but I won't. But the point is, it was just like, I was so delighted by him. And I was like, I want to see you again when we come back to Georgia. And like, I want you to be my friend. And I don't know if we would have connected if we hadn't crossed paths at this Georgia Tiny House Festival,
Oh yeah, there's probably no
like,
way.
It's just like, and it just makes me think, it's like all the people that you see at, going about your daily business that you're not connecting with. It's like, wow, it's like, there's so many great people, that might not be in our direct little circle, but are like worth knowing. And you can't judge them by appearance or by what you think their life perspective is.
Yeah, I was judging him. I think I judged him in the beginning because he was just loud. He talked really loud, and he was just kind of aggressive. But then I was like listening to him, and I was like, wow.
He's a passionate guy.
Yeah, he was just a passionate dude. And it was awesome. Yeah.
That's what I learned.
That's great. I think we're out of time, but we do want to give you guys a chance to just sort of share with us where people can connect with you online, and particularly, what would you like folks to know about what's coming up for you, any appearances or other things, maybe some content or media that you're about to release?
Absolutely. You can learn all about our journey with a purpose at tinyhouseexpedition.com, and you can watch some of our documentary work and other video work on YouTube, Tiny House Expedition, and we're on Facebook and Instagram. And coming out this coming week is Living Tiny Legally Part 2, continuing of our educational documentary series on legal issues around tiny housing. And this one includes the historic tiny house appendix for the International Residential Code. And I know policy stuff can sound boring, but it's truly gripping and a mountain of information. So stay tuned this week on YouTube, and you can, in the meantime, watch part 1.
Right. And the best way to to get updates on our YouTube channel, like when the part 2 is actually going to be on there, is to subscribe. So when you subscribe, it lets you know that we've posted something new. You can check it out.
And by the time this podcast airs, that may have already been released. So there should be a link in the show notes to part 1 and 2.
Perfect.
And if not, we'll be sure to urge people to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Great. Well, thank you guys. This is fantastic.
Oh,
really,
so good talking to you guys.
really, really enjoyed this.
Thanks so much.
Have fun.
Yeah.
We're excited to be part of your podcast.
Yeah, cool.
That's it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this really insightful conversation with Alexis and Christian. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything we mentioned, including their website, part 1 of their film series, Living Tiny Legally, all the books they mentioned, plus their social media profiles. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/tinyhouseexpedition, all one word. That's ownstream.co/tinyhouseexpedition.
Also, before we let you go, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up.
Finally, we've just started our Facebook page. Please like us at facebook.com/Ownstream and be the first to know about new podcast episodes, new blog content, and cool stuff related to our personal journey. Also, we're on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram, where we post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.